Once, a man called Mukama came from the east on the Bukedi side with his wife called Nawodo. It is said that he also came with the following children. 1. Chitimbo, the 2nd, Nkono, the 3rd, Wakoli, the 4th, Walube at Kigulu, the 5th, Zibondo at Mulamoji, the 6th, Tabingwa at Luuka, and the 7th, Muzaya at Muzaya. Mukama left Mount Elgon with his wife, 5 children, dogs, cows, spears, cattle, goats, and many other things. While exploring Busoga, he arrived at a place called Namakoko in Bukono. He had his son Unyi, Chitimbo Nkono, with him and asked him if he wanted Bukono for himself. The boy said yes, and so Mukama gave it to him. He then proceeded to give land to his other children. The first, Okali, was given Bukoli and his title was to be Koli. The second, Ibanda, was given the part of Kigulu and his title Ngobi. The third, Ngamadi, who was given the part of Bulamoji, his title was to be Zibondo. The fourth child, Ngobi Mao, received Muzaya and his title Muzaya. The fifth child, Chitimbo, was given Bugabula and crowned Gabula. The sixth, Nido, was given Luuka and his title was Tabingwa. One Mukama, who after became the ruler of Bunyoro, or his son, came to Busoga from Mount Elgon. His wife gave birth to his children, and to each he apportioned the part of the land that they were born in. The first, Akoli, was given Bukoli. The second, Zibondo, was given Bulamoji. The third, Nkono, received Bukono. The fourth child, Tabingwa, received Luuka. And lastly, the fifth, Ngobi, received Kigulu. Each of these stories I just told all talk of Mukama giving land to his children, even though their names keep changing. Mukama, as we discussed in the last episode, is the Adamic figure of the northern Busoga states. His children are the founders of the polities that took form in that region. They are known as the AbaiseNgobi. Today, the AbaiseNgobi are the royals of the current kingdom of Busoga. The king, or Kyabazinga, is to be chosen from the ruling houses that make up the AbaiseNgobi. Previously, each of these houses ruled autonomously from one another and had their own titles. For example, the title of the ruler of Kigulu is Ngobi. The ruler of Bugabula is called Gabula, Bulamoji, Zibondo, just like their titles were given to them by Mukama in the stories. But today, we are going to be talking about the AbaiseNgobi of Kigulu. Why, you might ask? 'Cause that's where I'm from. Well, my people are from the district of Iganga, which includes Kigulu, specifically from the village of Nabikote, which is part of Kigulu. Nabikote for life, boy! Okay, nobody says that. Kigulu wasn't always known as Kigulu. It used to be called Buzimba, until the merging of Buzimba and the Busambira polity by Ngobi Chikere in the 1890s. So you'll see the state referred to in some places as Buzimba Kigulu. The name Kigulu came from a popular hill where the founder of the state, Ngobi Ibanda, moved to when he came of age. The story goes, at least one of them, that his heavily pregnant mother came across a stream. This stream had a lot of bamboo shoots growing out of it. As she attempted to cross, the poor woman slipped and cried out, "We Ibanda!" And in that moment, caught one of the bamboo shoots to break her fall. She was able to pull herself to shore where she gave birth. The child was named Ibanda, which translates to bamboo. And now you know the meaning and origin of my name. The name of Ibanda Ngobi's mother was Naigaga of the AbaiseNgobi. Mukama commanded several of his followers to take the child to Nenda Hill, where they had stayed some time ago. Some of these followers included Nakuni, a Mwise Nangwe, Mboira, Mukama's uncle, Ompiti, a Mwise Nsobia, Nabala, a Mwise Mususwa, and Nkwanga, a Mwise Nkwanga. They represented the clans that were following Mukama. Together, they took the young prince to Nenda Hill and became very affectionately connected to him. But it was the AbaiseNgobi who were front and center when it came to raising the young lord. It is said that Mukama gave them Nenda Hill, and while there, everyone was under the domain of the AbaiseNgobi. When the young prince was of age, Ibanda Ngobi was moved to Kigulu Hill, and there his followers built him an enclosure. After that, like his father, he too traveled the country and had 2 sons, Nido and Lugwiri. Nido would go on to found the state of Luuka, while Lugwiri established Buzimba. Now, wait a second. This is where things start to get a little bit confusing, because I thought Ibanda was the founder of Buzimba. You see, in another story, Lugwiri or Lugwiriri was the son of Mukama, and he was the father of Nido. In one of the many versions that Waikiluboko presents, Nido and AbaiseNgobi are brothers. Their father is Mukama and their grandfather is Kintu. So what's going on?
There is no difference between AbaiseNgobi or Nido.
That was the voice of Prince Ibrahim Chitaula, who is the head of the Kigulu Cultural Museum.
His actual names were Ibanda, Niro, Chibi, Ngobi of Kigulu. So from there, we got the title of the leader of Kigulu to be Ngobi. Then also, the AbaiseNgobi got the clan. And now all the descendants of Mukama of Nyoro, who came after, took up the issue of, the name of being of the AbaiseNgobi clan. Even being the founder of the AbaiseNgobi clan in the whole of Busoga, not only Kigulu. That is why they are called AbaiseNgobi, from the title Ngobi given to Prince Ibanda Niro. That other name, Chivi, is also sometimes included in some researches.
So, according to Prince Chitaula, there is no difference between the names, and adds an additional one, Chibi. Now, this reminded me of the writings of another African historian, Yolamu Nsamba. Commenting on Bunyoro history, Nsamba wrote that many historical figures had the same names. In an effort to create a more streamlined version of Bunyoro history, writers such as John Yakatura consolidated the lives and stories of figures from the past. So, Ndahura, who speared his grandfather Bukuku, was probably not the same Ndahura who heralded the Chitara Empire at its apex. Considering this analysis, could this be the case with Busoga history as well? Probably. Maybe. There is no way for us to confirm whether Ngobi Ibanda was the same person as Nido or Lugwiri, or if they were separate people. Okay, moving on. So how did the AbaiseNgobi come to power? I mean, realistically, because legend assures us that Mukama found an empty land, and he simply took over by giving them to his sons. However, this is in stark contrast to the traditions of some commoner clans, who make the claim that they were there long before the arrival of the royals. Anthropologist Lloyd Fowlers recorded a conversation he overheard at a beer party in Busoga in the 1950s. George, a man who was a member of the royal clan, apparently said this to another man who was a commoner.
"We found this place empty and made something of it. You fellows later came around begging for land, so we were generous and gave you some. Naturally, you are now our slaves."
The commoner responded, "Oh, what a lie. We were here long before you. You took your power by trickery. You princes have always been scoundrels." The exchange then ends with general laughter. In Busoga, men from the royal clans are referred to as Balangira. Interestingly, the word Mulangira, which refers to a single prince, is also used for smallpox. According to Lubogo, because smallpox is said to be the disease that killed Mukama, the Busoga apparently called smallpox Mulangira. In the women's case, the princesses, the word for princesses is Abambeda, a word that I heard a lot from my aunties when I was growing up. As for the commoners, they're called Wakopi, and they include the non-AbaiseNgobi. But let's go back to the conversation between the prince and commoner. Was the land really taken by trickery? Okay, of course I'm aware that this exchange was a friendly one, at least it appears to be as written by the author. Still though, it reflected an aspect of Busoga society. Those who were seen as being above others, which would be the royals, and the commoners who were below. The royals were the ones believed to have stumbled upon an empty land and had the right to give away some of it to the commoners, who would then provide labor. As historian Peter Nyenga explains, the land system functioned as an appendage to the political system, and that land ownership literally meant chieftainship. In his article, The Political Transformation of Northern Busoga, D.W. Cohen displays the complex nature of the relationship between Balangira and Bakopi. The legends, as you no doubt know by now, have a tendency to oversimplify. To say that Busoga was an empty land is inaccurate. To say that the commoners were slaves robs the Bakopi of their agency in the story and relegates them to side characters. Prior to the arrival of the AbaiseNgobi, there were already power centers that existed in this supposed empty land, such as the Chisenguli community of the Abaisemusobo, which was taken over by the incoming Abaisemena, who are also considered to be AbaiseNgobi. The states they found didn't merely roll over and accept the new immigrants in the land, but rather negotiated with them in a variety of ways. What I mean by this is, for example, in almost every story about Mukama and the AbaiseNgobi, hunting is mentioned, whether it was Mukama, who was considered an exceptional hunter, or one of his sons. Which tracks given that the early state founders are remembered for winning over the people by providing them with meat. This is particularly the case when talking about the states of Busiki and Bugweri. Researcher Renee Tantala stated that during times of famine, this must have been particularly helpful. People sought out these great providers of meat in exchange for services, goods, and women. Cohen cautions this by saying that we shouldn't take this to mean that famine was the main driver for the formation of these states, but rather it provides context. Another way the AbaiseNgobi took over was through marriages. I should preface this, though, what I'm going to say next, by saying that the following analysis applies provided you agree that the origins of the AbaiseNgobi are Luo. The popular tradition is that they came from the royal family of Bunyoro. Now, it appears that the incoming Luo had a tendency to marry outside their group. The men would pick a wife from the groups in the areas they settled in. This was no doubt a way of consolidating power by merging two groups of people. But they took this a step further and had their offspring be raised by the child's mother's clan. Exhibit A, Igbanangobi. His mother was a Mwise Gaga of the AbaiseGaga. Legend tells us that Mukama had them take the boy and raise him at Nenda Hill, which was part of the Busambira polity that the AbaiseGaga ruled. Why? Why would a ruler choose to have his son raised among his wife's people? Cohen explains this as a form of colonization, but a form of colonization that goes both ways. Let me explain. The process of raising a prince among his mother's people ensured that he was more familiar with his mother's customs. He would speak their language, observe their customs, he would act like one of them, essentially going through a process of Bantuization. This refers to the fact that the Luo are a part of the Nilotic ethnic group while people they found were Bantu. Over time, the mother's clan would become so invested in the fortunes of the young prince and thereby create a powerful base of support. And oh boy, did they ever. By being invested in this success, they could gain more political power. The mothers of these princes were crucial links between the kingship and their people. Overall, this process would no doubt endear the Luo to the natives and make it easier to rule. However, it also goes the other way. This process they were carrying out, this idea of raising a prince in their mother's clan, was a Luo one. By practicing it, they were expressing a Luo concept and they knew it. Hence the explanation that the colonization goes both ways. By the way, just so we're clear, the princes would be taken to see their fathers once in a while. They weren't completely uninvolved. A third way of consolidating power was by way of religion. Not by imposing their own on the locals, but by taking on their faiths. The Luo/AbaiseNgobi adopted the Misambo spirits of the people they met. The priests of these shrines acted as translators and intercessors between the Luo and the gods. For instance, you see this in the case of the AbaiseNkwalu. We'll get into the full story in a bit, but basically, they were kicked off their land by the AbaiseNgobi of Kigulu. The AbaiseNkwalu were worshippers of a spirit called Nawansinge. With Nawansinge's shrines now abandoned by the fleeing group, the AbaiseNgobi continued their maintenance by giving the responsibility to their allies, the AbaiseGaga. That way, the worship of Nawansinge never stopped. It was said that the people came to believe that Nawansinge was working with the new rulers of the land. Tantala also observed that other villages in the domain of the AbaiseNgobi of Kigulu also had their own local spirits. They weren't erased when their places were taken over, they were maintained. They existed side by side with their gods. Nevertheless, this did not always work, because when faced with resistance, the AbaiseNgobi also used violence. Case in point, Chiregea, the 11th or 10th or 12th successor of the Ngobi title of Busimba, depending on what king list you're looking at. It is here that we leapfrog into the 19th century. The bulk of the historical information we have on Busimba comes from this time period. Chiregea was crowned in 1830, and one day, he decided he wanted to take over a community in southern Busoga called Nawansinge. So when he approached Bagule, the leader of this group, and requested that he marry his daughter, Bagule, a Mwisenkwalu chief, immediately saw through this and rejected his offer. Chiregea became angry at this and sent a group of men to kill his would-be father-in-law. Bagule was murdered and the AbaiseNgobi fled Nawansinge. But they were not done. The AbaiseNgobi and other clans living in the community came back and fought. They put up so much of a resistance that Chiregea and his men exclaimed that it wasn't worth the effort anymore. Their determination was simply too much. From then on, no prince was allowed to stay a night in Nawansinge. As you can see, the AbaiseNgobi were not shy about using violence when they met resistance. Chiregea lost the throne in 1836 and his son, or brother, Nkobe, again depending on where you get your information from, took over. The fight for Nawansinge would continue on later. Nkobe fought a series of defensive wars against the state of Luoka, one they have a shared founder with. Nkobe won these wars due to the help of the large Abaise immigrant family from Bugweri of the Abaisemena. The Abaise gave a girl for the king to marry, as was custom whenever immigrant families came under AbaiseNgobi rule. This clan had a lot of people, and they came to numerically dominate Nawansinge. Now, Nkobe had a son named Obo, a child that he had with the Mwisenkwalu girl that he married. Obo participated in the battles against the Wuka. He had the support of the Abaise since they were his mother's clan. He also had the support of the Abaisemagumba. However, while he had the backing of those whose fortunes were tied to his, Obo was a cruel prince. He was given the nickname Musongola, which meant the sharpener, because he used to sharpen people like pencils. I'm just kidding, I don't know. It isn't mentioned what he used to do exactly, at least not by Tantala, who collected this information. But it is probably sharpener in like a sharpener that sharpens a spear, sword, or knife. Needless to say, he was very unpopular, which led to his unsuccessful campaign for the Ngobi title in the years to come. Obo's father, Nkobe, died in 1850, and this triggered a massive conflict between princes putting forth a claim. See, among the AbaiseNgobi, the throne didn't just pass from father to son, but could also pass from brother to brother, which Cohen noted seemed to lead to a higher rate of succession, Busimba Kigulu being the most prime example. More eligible princes from the throne complicated things even more. The civil war that occurred after the death of Nkobe resulted in the creation of some 8 separate states, all claimed by some member of the royal family. The reason for this could be that the passing of the throne from brother to brother increased even more the number of those eligible to take the crown. I mean, the AbaiseNgobi already had a lot of children, given that they were getting wives from all families settling in their territories. Also, these incoming groups may have, Cohen argues, exacerbated the situation. Let me set the backdrop for the 19th century in Busoga. Beginning in the 18th century, Buganda began an aggressive expansion into neighboring territories. They began to overtake Bunyoro, which had been the dominant power in the region, extending their influence to states like Kochi, Wera, south past the Kagera River to Chiziba, Karagwe, Buzinja, and Busubi. Some of these nations, like Kochi and Karagwe, had a heavy connection to Bunyoro, and by Buganda taking over these places, served to indicate the new dominant power in the land. In Busoga's case, their many polities began to give tribute to Uganda. Historian Samakola Chiwanuka writes that each Busoga polity was given to a Muganda chief to oversee. However, historian Peter Nyenga counters this by saying that the Baganda learned that Busoga states would not be so easily controlled and that we should treat Chiwanuka's claim with caution. He gives the example of Kabakachabagu of the early 18th century. The Busoga states pushed back against his attempt to colonize their land. And also, much to Nyenga's point, if the Buganda owned Busoga, why were they pillaging it all the time? In fact, when Captain James Grant of the British Imperial Army was made aware of the cruelty of Buganda towards Busoga states, he suggested that they give a set annual tribute to Buganda in exchange for not being raided. This, most of the Busoga states not only didn't do, but also the Buganda chiefs said, nah, we're just gonna attack them anyways. Tribute or no tribute. However, it is true that Buganda wielded a significant amount of influence and power in Busoga. What is being argued here is that they didn't own them outright. Anyways, those in South Busoga were raided constantly, not to mention they faced interstate wars with their neighbors. Also, their economy came to be dominated by Buganda and those in the Buvuma Islands. It was often said that it was so bad that not a single tree or bush could be found for cutting firewood. The South was looking like a less and less tenable place to live. Many people from southern Busoga began to pick up and head north. They attached themselves to the AbaiseNgobi royals who could provide them with land and opportunity. In fact, a lot of the newcomers found themselves in pretty high positions not long after arriving in the north. A prime example being the AbaiseMulondo. They apparently introduced some Buganda Bunyoro ideas of kingship in Busoga and were given the position of seating various Busoga leaders in the land. Their seats came to be known by their names, Mulondo or Namulondo. So the theory is that the newcomers may have emboldened the princes who otherwise would not have competed by offering them support, much like the AbaiseMuhaya gave support to Obo. Speaking of Obo, he participated in the succession wars between 1850 to 1862 and managed to acquire the throne for a brief period of time. However, he never managed to complete the accession rites, so in the eyes of many, he was not a true king or Ngobi. He was branded a usurper and sent packing back to South Kigulu where he came from. From this, the Busoga created a saying that goes, open quotes, "Kalenzigenda bagalaba kulobi," which means, go away, little boy. The girls have refused you. The girls, I'm guessing in this case, being the other royals. They rejected him, like a girl rejects the advances of a boy. It's said that one of the reasons he was kicked out was because of his cruel practices. Remember, he had a very dark nickname, and it was probably this that made him change his name to Gonza Abato, which means lover of small children. The name has a paternalistic feeling to it. He would rule like a father who loved his children. Anyways, Obo, now Gonza Abato, went back south to his territory only to find, the new king / Ngobi Chiwayo, who may or may not have been his brother, refused to give him his land back. Apparently, Chiwayo tried to stop Gonza Abato from returning home and tried to replace him with another prince, something that he would surely come to regret. Now, the AbaiseMuhaya, the clan of Bato's mother, mobilized their fighters. They summoned help from their fellow clansmen in Budiope all the way in Bugabula and marched to the Kabaka of Buganda to plead their case. This is something that a lot of the Busoga states did. The Kabaka accepted and gave them men. Together they overthrew Chiwayo and split the plunder between them. Chiwayo was no more, and Gonza Abato regained control of his polity in southern Kigulu. Now, during this time, Gonza Abato gave support to an upcoming prince that he believed would be a more suitable ruler of Buzimba. His name was Walusanza, and he came to power in 1862. Now, Walusanza seems to have been a good ruler. He did manage to depose some of the renegade princes and take back parts of the kingdom. However, Walusanza had a very unfortunate death, and it started in 1879 with a request from the Kabaka of Buganda. According to Waike Luogo, Kabaka Mutesa had asked Wakoli, which is a title of the king of Bukoli, to send a delivery of vegetables, or mutere, which means dried bananas. It appears that Wakoli of Bukoli did not have enough to send to the Kabaka, and so he turned to Ngobi Walusanza and asked him to contribute. Ngobi agreed. The Wakoli went on his way with porters to deliver to the Kabaka. Upon opening the loads of vegetables that were being dropped off, the Kabaka was shocked to find a chocolate surprise in the vegetables. What he found was human feces in the vegetables. Now, Kabaka Mutesa was furious. Wakoli pleaded for his life and placed the blame on Ngobi wa Lusansa. The pretext for this being that these two had a beef between them and they actually apparently hated each other. Which raises the question, why would he ask the person who hates him for help in the first place? I don't know if this was the actual reason or if it was the work of someone else hoping to get the Wakoli killed, or if it was a nefarious plot by the Wakoli to overthrow the Ngobi. Whatever it was, the Kabaka was not pleased and someone was going to pay for it. An army was quickly assembled and they headed for Walusansa. From the way Lubogo tells the story, it doesn't seem like Walusansa was aware of what happened, because he showed up when he was summoned by the head commander of the army and he was shot dead right then and there. They then proceeded to ransack the place and set it on fire and torture the young son of Walusansa. The boy, whose name was Niro, or Miro, as he was referred to by the Baganda, was forced to drink the blood of his dead father. His stomach apparently swelled up like that of a frog, and he was given the name Jikere, which means frog. He was also given the name Kanyamusai, which means he drank blood. But the thing about this is that this exact same story is said to be how Kakuku, a king of Luuka, died sometime in the 1850s. Could it be that the exact same thing happened to both kings about 30 years apart? Or is this some kind of mix-up? And when I say the exact same story, I'm referring to the part about human feces in the bananas. I asked historian D.W. Cohen about his thoughts on this matter.
You're the first person who's asked that.
Oh yeah?
And you're saying that they happened 30 years apart. I don't know. I don't know. I think you're on top of this in a really interesting way. And what you may have found is the remnant of an explanation. I mean, if you think about it, think about all the communicative activity has to take place for people in 1966 or to know what happened in 1847 and 1879.
Yeah.
In another place.
Yeah.
That was basically an allegation.
So basically, it may be too much of an expectation for people to remember the exact details of something that happened so long ago, especially when it was during a time when things were not documented. You'll find a lot of conflicting stories when it comes to Busoga's history, and we kind of have to make do with what we have. In any case, Miro was taken captive by the Baganda for 13 years. But don't worry, he wasn't locked up in a dungeon somewhere and punished some more for the sins of his father. The blood-licking seems to be the extent of it, at least as far as I could find. Miro was supposedly treated quite well in Buganda. He grew up there. He stayed at the place of Ham Mukasa, a man who would eventually become a prominent Buganda chief. Miro learned to speak Luganda and made many Baganda friends. Life was good for him. Meanwhile, in Buzimba Chigulu, Gologolo, the brother of Walusansa, succeeded him. Lubogo says that he ruled well, but supposedly, according to another source, his ascent was protested. Some wanted Miro to be brought back to rule instead. The story goes that 4 princesses were sent to Buganda to the Kabaka to select whom he wanted to marry. In exchange, the Kabaka would give back the young prince. The king picked a princess from Buera, one of the many micro-kingdoms of Chigulu, and released Miro. Lubogo, on the other hand, simply tells us that when the boy came of age, he was given an army and sent back home. This happened on the 8th of April, 1892. However, this may not have been the only reason he was released, because it was during this time that the British Empire was setting shop in Uganda. According to D.A. Lowe in his book Fabrication of Empire, a British soldier by name of C.S. Reddy found himself in a bit of a pinch. He had been sent to Bukoli to ensure the route to the coast remained open. For some background, Busoga was in a strategic position. This was because it had one of the routes to the Mombasa coast. However, in 1892, a civil war broke out in Buganda, and supposedly a group of Buganda and Bukoli incited the locals against him. In response, Lugard sent Captain Williams to rescue Reddy. Armed with a Maxim gun, mercenary troops, and Baganda soldiers, Williams embarked on a rescue mission. Along the way, he was able to subjugate 4 Busoga chiefs and accomplish his mission. He also went to Buzimba and installed Miro as the new Ngobi. Now, according to Lubogo, Miro was a very arrogant king. He spoke only Luganda and mistreated his fellow Busoga. But to the British, Miro was described as the staunchest ally, at least by Captain James Grant. In fact, the historian Lowe describes him on more than one occasion as Grant's protege. For his support, Miro was backed heavily by the British and was able to unite the cluster of states in his domain. He gave it the name Kigulu, after a hill of the same name. Miro was so helpful to the British that Grant considered him for the position of Katikiro, or Prime Minister, in Busoga. Basically, he would be Grant's right-hand man since he was effectively in control of Busoga at that time. This was one of the reasons why Lubogo said that Miro acted like he ruled Busoga. This was the beginning of the construction of the now Kingdom of Busoga. Unfortunately, Miro died after a long journey to Nairobi. He had been selected to assist in the carrying of the property of the Indian troops who had been brought to quell the Sudanese rebellion against the British Empire. Miro Chikere Kanyomsai died on July 7, 1899. Commenting on his death, Grant said, open quotes, "No such capable man can be found to fill his place." Close quotes. As many of you already know, the British Empire would go on to form what would become the nation of Uganda by 1900. Thank you for listening, and if you're watching, thank you for checking out the episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. My name is David Ibanda, and this is the show Those Who Came Before Us. Peace.